Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, Tesla has joined the $1 trillion club, one of only 5 companies with over a $1 trillion market cap. A federal judge has granted an injunction, a ban that bars civilians and military from being fired for refusing to take the COVID vaccine due to religious reasons. And Facebook is changing its name to Meta. So will Meta now make it better? That and more tonight on Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hope your week went well. I'm Andre Laborde. Our goal is bringing Wall Street to your street for today, for Friday, October the 29th, 2021, and get you ready for the week ahead. Well, the numbers came out this week from the Commerce Department that inflation is rising at the fastest pace in 30 years, and employment costs are rising the fastest in 19 years. And this week, 1/3 of the S&P reported their third quarter earnings. Microsoft and Alphabet recorded strong earnings. In fact, Alphabet, or Google as we may know it, had earnings of $11 billion from last year at this time. That's revenues of almost $1 billion a month. And Microsoft earned higher in all sectors of the company, from the cloud, gaming, and of course, their software. And as you go into almost any business today, there are help wanted signs. Well, employers are having difficult times trying to hire today. Later tonight, we'll be talking with Ron Hetrick. Now, Ron's a senior labor economist at MZ Broken Glass, and he's going to be with us in just a moment. But before that, just how did the markets do this week? Well, all the major averages closed higher for the week. The Dow Jones average ended the week at 35,819. That was up 89 points for the day and up 0.4 of a point for the week. And the S&P 500 closed today at 4,605, up almost 9 points for the day and up 1.3% for the week. And finally, the NASDAQ. They finished the week at 15,498, up 50 points for the day and up 2.7% for the week. The Dow Jones and the S&P ended higher for the 4th straight week. And the S&P and the NASDAQ posted their best month since November of 2020. All 11 S&P sectors ended higher for October, and Morgan Stanley is raising Tesla's price target to now $1,200 a share. Well, let's get to our guest tonight. He is the senior labor economist from MZ Broken Glass. His name is Ron Hetrick, and he's here with us tonight. Hi, Ron. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Thank you so much, Andre. It's great to be here today.
Ron, thanks so much for being here. Ron, you can't, anywhere in the United States today, there is help wanted signs wherever you go. What do you think the biggest reason for all these help wanted signs are?
You know, it's really a great question, and something I think a lot of people just don't really understand about our country right now. There is a tremendous misalignment of the people that we have available versus the types of jobs that we're creating. So let's take the current jobs right now. You have 6.5 million that I'm estimating, probably on the low end, that do not require any kind of college education, not even an associate's degree. But when we look at the number of people that are out there looking for work, unemployed people that only have a high school diploma or less, we only have about 2.7 million. So those are the ones that are, unemployed. So right away you see, 2.7 million to fill 6.5 million openings. Part of the problem as well is a lot of those people that only have the high school diplomas are the ones that are not re-engaging. So, we're going to talk about, lower labor force participation rates, but this is the big thing here. If you look at people with at least a bachelor's diploma, their labor force is actually higher than it was previously to COVID. But if we just talk about those without a high school degree, their labor force participation rate and their labor force is actually much, much lower. And those are the people that we really feel the pain that we're missing.
Well, Ron, because of the labor market today, do you think that before March of 2020, there were many jobs that were demanding a college or a higher degree of education. But today, because there is so much demand for hiring, do you think that those standards would be lower? That there are many jobs that can be done without a college degree. Do you think that will be opening up for employers to be requesting?
I actually feel like the problem that we're having could be the other way. So, as people on the lower end think about it, you have restaurants, manufacturers, retail, all with record numbers of job openings right now, and they keep increasing their pay rates, trying to pursue a labor force that is just so decimated at that lower end. And eventually, their wages are going to start to overlap. The wages of maybe some of these lesser college degrees, and that's where I start to get concerned is how are these people going to fill these jobs?
Let's say a fast food restaurants, and name your fast food, whether it be Taco Bell or McDonald's or wherever our viewers are that in our areas that have.
Mhm.
Usually these kind of employees are first-time starter jobs. They may be in high
Yeah.
school. They may have a very small resume that they don't know. So they're being paid accordingly because they don't have the professional skills as others. But now that the hour, and I think you know where I'm going on this, and now that the hourly wages are going so high up, employers are maybe getting squeezed with their margins. Will those first-time starter jobs be going away?
So you're already seeing, I've been traveling a lot in this country, and I've been to some of the smallest towns, and you are already seeing limited service with these places. Some of these fast food restaurants are literally, they have a person in the drive-through and they've got a person making the food. I mean, they have no choice but to do that squeeze. I think these people would like to have those employees, even with the higher pay rates, because if you're watching the prices of these goods, you go to a McDonald's now, what was costing you $6 or $7 is now $10, $11, depending on the city that you're in. So I think they're trying to figure out a way of making up that money. But I really believe the problem is they simply cannot staff to the levels that they want.
I know of a few restaurants. In fact, I know one restaurant owner who has a couple of locations, and they had to cannibalize. They've closed one. He closed one of his restaurants because he needed the employees from his 3 restaurants to go to the other 2, and he's thinking of closing the other one just to be able to staff the most frequented location. And it's gotten to be that bad. Do you think with automation, do you think with IT getting to be the way it is today, that those places, such like you mentioned, McDonald's or other locations, will be dealing more with kiosks than we have with the human person?
You know, it's such a fantastic question, especially the way we approach, automation in this country. It seems that every time we do something, we end up creating more jobs. And I've kind of cracked up in some of the places that I've been at that have these kiosks. There are still people sitting at the counter waiting for you to come up and give your order. So it's like we're using these technologies, but we're really not using them in a way that takes away that really high level of service. We have had a decent amount of people that just simply may not return to the labor force.
Yeah. Ron, it's always amazed me whenever they come out with the unemployment rate, with the labor participation rate, and such as like last month, we had a 61.6 labor participation rate. Well, to me, that's about a 39% people that have decided not to be going back in the labor force. Now, I can only speak for myself, but between mortgage, rent, food on the table, I've gotten used to going to the grocery. How do these people participate? Is it just because of with government programs, or they're living in the basement with their parents? If they decide not to participate in the workforce, how do they live?
That is the absolute perfect question, and the question that I've been asked more than anything as I go around the country speaking on these issues right now. I will just assume, and some people consider this harsh, but I'm going to assume that if you're not participating in the labor force, that you have the means to not participate. And so if you look at it, you can say that through several things. So one of the things we've talked about in an article that we wrote was the accumulation of wealth amongst boomers was astounding. The average boomer is retiring, with $1.2 million. And one of the byproducts of that is that you are seeing, especially prime age men, not moving out of their parents' home. In the last census, more men 25 to 34 years old were living with their parents than with a spouse for the first time, I think, since the Civil War. And I think that this is a pervasive mindset of a lot of younger people are delaying life and are able to kind of maybe survive not off of their own income, but off the income maybe of their family. I think that is one aspect. Certainly, I think those two pandemic programs that we created, pandemic unemployment assistance, pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, we were still cutting almost 9 million checks when those programs ended on September 6th. And I think there's a bit of a hangover effect. People save some of that money. Think about it. You were not commuting. You were not incurring any of these costs. These checks, were coming to your house, and you received maybe 37, 39 weeks of that after you had received 26 weeks of unemployment insurance. So that's a lot of time to be accumulating money. If you were just making, meager wages before, you had a steady pay there for quite a long period of time. And I think some people banked that, which is exactly why you're not seeing the amount of people coming back now that I think you would have expected to see. And I believe this is going to hold true for October as well.
I've talked to a number of employers, and they say the same thing like yourself. Between the federal unemployment monies that were coming in, and I know as in finance, there's between $4.5 to $5 trillion in cash, sitting in cash reserves, in checking accounts, in savings accounts, and others that are coming in stimulus money that has been accumulating. And of course, retailers love this going into the Christmas season. If only there was something to sell and it wouldn't be out in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on that. If you look at real median household income last year, I mean, it went from 68 to 78, almost 79,000. You're talking about a series that over the course of 20 years barely moved by a couple grand. And then in 1 year, we jumped about 10K. And so you had a lot of people that were receiving even those CARES Act checks, $1,200 or so, but that's added onto the income you had. And a lot of these people were working and still receiving that money. So it's natural that you did accumulate some of that during that time. And I'll relate an anecdote, and I got to be careful. We're painting in broad brushes here, but I did talk to a manufacturing company 2 weeks ago at an association event, and he told me while he was on the phone with the candidate was actively comparing the money that manufacturing plant was going to pay him versus the weekly checks that he was getting from pandemic unemployment assistance. And he said the difference was simply not enough for him to want to go back to work. Even though it was going to pay less, it wasn't enough of a difference to entice him back in. So we do hope that as those things start to fade away, that more and more people will say, I want to reengage.
We were talking about the new normal and how people were in lockdown for so long. And I'm curious of what you think the new normal is going to look like. Do you think the 40-hour work week in the office or the workplace is now over with?
To answer that question best, I think you have to look at things as almost like a split economy. So you have people who have, bachelor's degrees, and I was talking earlier about their labor force now is actually larger than it was pre-pandemic. However, those, at lesser forms of education are not even close to coming back to that. And you look at that difference, and I think that difference is people with a bachelor's degree, not only do they have maybe a full remote option, but everyone I'm talking to has at least a partial remote option. So I think the new normal when it comes to people with a college degree, I believe that is really comes down to it's not a full office all the time. It's funny, yesterday I was driving through our town here and I saw an office building that literally had its entire parking lot filled. I went to it by another one that was completely empty and another one that had about half of it filled. And I started thinking about this term new normal. And I almost feel like it's being defined company by company. But I'll tell you one thing for sure, and you hit upon it. This was a trend that we were seeing pre-COVID. And that is the number of people in this country that were voluntarily working part-time jobs over full-time jobs had increased dramatically. So there's two forms, right? There's people who work part-time because they have to, and those who work part-time because they want to. That 1-2 number was absolutely skyrocketing. And I think you will definitely see this trend occurring more and more. And the attraction of doing less hours and having more flexibility to do the things that you really want to do, man, that's a hard one to compete against.
True. And, adding on to what you're saying, Ron, is that I'm curious that, let's say for that person that wants to do just the lesser amount of hours per week, but now with other types of jobs, and I'm thinking of Uber or Lyft, and with it being an independent contractor, if you want to work 5 hours a week, 50 hours a week, it's up to you. Do you think that?
It is right now. So if you go and look at the self-employment number of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's up 1 million in the past year. So while employers are struggling to bring these people back, a lot of them are looking at this and going, I think I can make this work for yourself. Think about these kind of occupations: an electrician, a plumber, a maintenance worker. These are people that would be traditionally employed in some manufacturing and construction industries by an employer. But if you look at where we are right now with the tremendous need for workers, I mean, I live in Florida, and I tell you, you try to get an electrician, you try to get a plumber, you may be told it could be months before these people could come out. So I think a lot of these people are looking at it going, this is a tremendous time to start your own business.
It was reported last week that the Treasury, with the tax cuts and with the workforce the way it is, the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury, has ballooned to 75% more than what it was the year prior. And state budgets are having a larger increase in their state treasuries as well, too.
It's an interesting thing as well, just with people who, as employers are constantly struggling, they're out there panicking and trying to get people back. People are getting more empowered to do these things, even as they start to see other people, weaken or anything. You were thinking about starting that restaurant, other ones start to maybe have some trouble. You can do these things. I don't know if I necessarily feel that this is a long-term play. I believe that this is something that's going to be borne out over people saying, I want more flexibility. And they're certainly expressing that now. I mean, that's why we have 10.4 million job openings right now when it comes to these, large employers. I think people are saying, I want to be in control of this equation. That way in the future, if something were to happen, and you can bring into this anything you want, if you wanted to be vaxxed or not vaxxed, if you wanted to be masked or not masked, if you wanted all these other things, you're in control of that when you're your own employer versus having someone else mandate those things. And I think that's something we do have to take into consideration is I think a lot of people say, well, they have no option, so just go out and do this or just go out and do that. But the reality is people do have options and they're exercising those options. And I do believe that is a primary driver of why you're seeing some of this increase in self-employment.
We're going to take a break right now. If you're just joining us, we're so happy to have Ron Hedrick. And Ron is the senior labor economist at MZ Burning Glass. Don't go away. We'll take a break, but we'll be right back with Ron. And we're back. We're talking with Ron Hedrick. You brought up something before we went into the break, and I'm thinking about those that were doing the manufacturing. And you can think of other things like independent contractors that we're starting. Labor unions are now going involved and getting much more intertwined in wanting to get, and I'm thinking of Lyft and Uber drivers, or I'm thinking of other areas, Starbucks, the baristas are being pushed to unionize. Do you think this lockdown that occurred, do you think this strengthened labor unions, or do you think this damaged labor unions? What are your thoughts?
That's a pretty good question. I think we live in a country where people really don't like to be told what to do necessarily. And at a time when we see a lot of, I would call it almost self-empowerment when it relates to your career, what you want to do. I find it interesting that people would want to necessarily engage in that. I think anything where people represent people as a collective, in the past, a lot of this was needed because of just the tremendous advantage that employers had over employees. But if you look at where we are now, I mean, employees have so much power and they're exercising that with their feet. I mean, all we're talking about now is this great resignation, these tremendous quit rates. If you don't like what you're getting, you can just go down the street and get another job. So I feel like it's not necessarily the lockdowns and things like that that could have empowered these unions. I believe it's just more of the situation that we're in, that we have such a huge amount of demand for workers and so few out there that I wonder, do these workers really need someone to represent them when they feel like I can represent myself and get whatever I want?
The Biden administration is saying when asked the question of whether or not there's so much help wanted signs, well, it's because a lot of women are at home wanting to take care of their children, small-aged children. Well, they've got the an ulterior motive. They want to pass that $3.5 trillion spending bill that has child care put into it. So I can understand that, okay? But is there any truth to that area where women are not wanting to leave the wanting to go back into the workforce because they're too busy taking care of their children? What's the true story, do you think?
That is absolutely true. I'm not going to actually debate that particular point at all. And I'm going to tell you, it hits you several fold. So earlier I was talking about you have 6.5 million, basically we'll call them unskilled job openings, but only 2.7 million people that really are unemployed looking for work that would fit that. I mean, we could throw in another million or so that are out of the labor force. One of the cogs of the machine that we're trying to get restarted is childcare, and a lot of these places where we're paying $10, $11 an hour, and now you've got the fast food joint down the road paying 15, or Amazon if they're in their market, if you're in your market, paying $18 an hour. And so those jobs have really become a less desirable job. And I think that is something that until you can get that part of the engine going, it really makes it difficult for people to come back. That is a pretty significant thing. And I tell you something that's really important here. The labor force participation rate of prime age women was on the upswing right before COVID hit. Actually, it had a very, very good year the year before. That was breaking a long-term trend that we had. So we knew that that number was coming up. But if you look post-COVID, it plunged and it started to recover, and then it hit a brick wall, and it has not moved. And I believe a bit of that not moving is absolutely around childcare.
Yeah. And I remember very well what you're saying, Ron, is that I think it was in 2019, the labor participation for women in 2019 was the lowest that it had been, talking about women were finding employment in something like a 30-year history. We had Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff of the White House, on about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and he was explaining that, as well as the lowest job rate for African Americans and lowest job unemployment. I said job rate, I meant job unemployment for African Americans and job unemployment for Hispanics in recorded history. But for women, it was something like in 30 years, the lowest. The Biden administration is telling employers that those over 100 employees will have to be mandatory testings and such, or you're going to be fired. Well, with this job tightening the way it is, and you can just go ahead and get another job, I mean, you're looking at many first responders. I'm thinking of firefighters. I'm thinking of police, nurses and doctors. Do you think we're going to start seeing a shortage of first responders, that there are many, and what percentage, even if there's a 3 to 5%, or even a 2%. Sometimes there's such a tightening of first responders today. If you take 2% off police, firefighters, EMS, where do you think that we're going to be seeing a problem around our country?
I don't want to leap to that particular thing. I will comment as far as this is concerned. We are in the worst labor shortage that we've ever had. And I do see rhetoric thrown around that when people say, look, I don't want to get the vaccine, and people will say, fine, then we'll just go, you lose your job and we'll go get other people. I'm not so sure that people understand there are no other people out there. And I'm a little bit flabbergasted whenever I see these tough statements. When people have so many options. Yes, there is always going to be a little bit of pain if somebody loses their job. But in this particular, economy that we're living in right now, the ability to gain another job is incredibly strong. And I just feel that, when you start to draw lines where you say, I'm going to exclude people from the labor force because of these reasons, there is a naivety that maybe this country isn't where it's at right now, but maybe we were like we were, 20, 30 years ago when there was such this abundance of labor. The reality is, we already have a lot of people on the sidelines who are not re-engaging. Once again, some of those people may not be re-engaging because of some of the policies that are out there. And we do have to be sensitive to the fact that we want to cast the net as wide as possible. So anything that restricts that net, I just feel is very counterproductive. We've in order to get this economy moving, you need as many people in all of these jobs as fast as possible. And I feel that any barrier that gets in front of that right now is really kind of counterproductive for where we need to kind of go as a nation.
Last week, WeWork turned public. And for our viewers, WeWork is a company that leases large blocks of office space and basically subdivides it for short-term offices and such. That they're thinking with this type of an economy, do you see that the workforce today is going into that short-term, going to the office maybe instead of 5 days a week, 3 days a week, instead of do more of the Zoom meetings by home, DocuSign, rather than flying to your the next city to sign those contracts? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're seeing this kind of fits and starts happening right now. As someone who has flown 17 times in the past several weeks, I can tell you that a lot of my planes are packed. And I've done a lot of face to face meetings. I've attended association events with a lot of people, and it is invigorating. And I think as people have been away from it, I think I've seen a lot of people say, well, I've really gotten used to this. I don't think I want to go back. But I think there's a lack of understanding to how much you really do want that and desire that. And I think as people get a taste of it, you will see them start to come back. But until then, it's fits and starts. Like, I really see this as, certain populations coming back in and then going, hey, look, I actually like being in the office now. I actually know many people who have said that. And I think there was a study that came out a while ago that said Gen Z people were like, I like the office. Like, I don't want to be isolated.
I remember Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan Chase and James Gorman from Morgan Stanley said there's something about mentoring. You've got younger employees that are in, they have to be mentored by the senior employees. And sometimes you just can't do that over a Zoom or over a camera, that you want to be there in the office to be able to work with. And people like interaction with other people. So you've got a very good point. Ron, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andre. I appreciated being here.
Thank you, Ron Hedrick. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can always write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. Keep it pithy or concise. We'll be glad to answer your questions. And now for a look ahead for next week. But first, what company spends more per year on federal lobbying than any other company? We'll have that answer in just a moment. Well, what company spends more per year on federal lobbying than any other company? Facebook. In 2020, Facebook spent $19.6 million, which was 17.8% increase over 2019. Well, next week, we'll be talking about China and their goals of becoming the lone superpower over the United States. My guest will be Jonathan Ward. Now, Jonathan has consulted for the Department of Defense and many other Fortune 500 companies due to his expertise on China's goal of dominance. Plus, he's written a great book on the subject called China's Vision of Victory. Just this week, in fact, China launched a super hypersonic missile that circled the globe twice before landing. This caught our intelligence agencies completely by surprise. It's going to be a fascinating talk. That's next week with Jonathan Ward on China. And as a reminder, we always repeat the show on Sunday mornings, but always the best way is to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that's our show for Friday, October the 29th, 2021. Hope you enjoyed it. My thanks to Ron Hedrick for joining us this evening. And as always, my special thanks to you for allowing us into your homes tonight. And by the way, as a reminder, coming up in November, we've got some great guests coming up, including General David Petraeus. Now, you can always follow us on Facebook or whatever they may decide to call it, YouTube, Twitter, and WYES.org. So may you have a fun weekend and a productive week ahead. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap-Up, I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.